Welcome back, everybody. We're excited to have Doug here with us today. We're going to be talking about the topic that's going to be, I think, really, really interesting since we haven't really mentioned this much so far in the podcast. But we're going to be talking about sales managers, sales team, how we can kind of enable the sales manager by the right and proper setup inside of our Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever CRM you're using. So this doesn't feel like a massive chore. I would say that, 90%, 95% of the time when we start working with a company, the sales team usually does not love using the CRM. They usually say it's set up bad. They usually are looking for ways to not log in and just kind of get their job done without using the CRM. So should be a fun topic to get into to see like what works best that Doug has seen over his years. Doug, do you want to give us a little bit of an intro of who you are and what you've been up to?
Yeah, my name is Doug Davidoff. I'm the founder and CEO at Lift Enablement. We're a long-time advisory firm on all things go-to-market. In 2018, we pioneered providing RevOps services. And in 2024, I actually published a book on revenue operations and the impact of it called the Revenue Acceleration Framework. Excited that it hit bestseller and won some awards. And I think some of the things we're going to talk about, I probably wrote about in the book, but really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that too, because I saw that on your LinkedIn, which was Amazon #1 bestseller. When did you write the book and did it hit it right away or was it kind of a slow burn to get to that point?
No, with Amazon, you tend to get it out of the gate with a good promotional campaign behind it. So that's what we did. We kind of built up the demand for it. Took me about 2 years to write it. Candidly, if I had known how hard it was going to be to write it and actually the writing of it wasn't the hard part. It's everything that you do after you're done writing to the point of having it ready to actually produce. If I had known how hard that was going to be, I don't know that I would have had the courage to do it. But luckily I was already too deep in the waters to not follow through with it. So we got that done. And it was fascinating when the book was released. I still remember it. I still, to this day, as I, take a look and see reports of the, how many books were sold yesterday, et cetera. I get as excited about someone buying a $19 book as I do when they sign a $200,000 advisory contract. So it's kind of like letting your kids out in the world. Because like in this conversation, if I think you misunderstand something, I can go, well, Jordan, no, what I meant to say was, with a book, it's like, it's there. However you interpret it, that's what it's left to. So it's a fascinating experience from that standpoint.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of time, effort, energy goes into something like that too. So I could see it from both sides, which is just like you want to make sure they understand it right and where you're coming from. But then the other side is it's just, I can't imagine the amount of prep, work, rereading, re-editing that you probably do to get to the final product to actually push it out. So yeah, I get where
by the time you release it, you're sick of it. It's like, if I never see these words again in my life, it'll be too soon.
Right. That's what I've heard.
But seeing it for the first time, I highly encourage you. It's well worth the effort.
Okay. Awesome. Did you work with someone to put that out or did you do it all on your own?
I worked with Lioncrest on the packaging and publishing of it.
Okay. Yeah. Probably even more of a chore to try to do it all independently too. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Well, congrats again, like on your book. Like I said, I saw that was the #1 bestseller. So thanks for kind of introing that with who you are as well. Getting into some of the topics we said that we wanted to try to get to in this combo. So obviously you've been around CRMs for a long time. I saw Lift Enablement, I think 22, almost 23 years now. So with that amount of time, I can imagine you've seen some really awesome CRMs and you've probably seen some that have been a little bit scary when you get into them. Has your experience, let's start there. Has your experience been similar to mine where when you get in there that the sales team is usually trying to look for ways to not use it as much? Does that seem to kind of be like the majority of the time that you get into these businesses? Or no, you see a lot of the time they're happy to use it and they're adopting it?
So it's fascinating. So yes, I see the same. I have the same experience. I think salespeople with their current CRM very much look to avoid it. I think, far too often it becomes one more thing that they have to do. It's not built or designed for their use. It doesn't really drive any behavior or decisions or conversation. And it becomes a micromanagement, big brother oversight like that. Too often that's what CRM becomes and how it gets used. The thing that's fascinating is even among the resistors, as we're talking about rolling out a new CRM, there is generally excitement about that. So, there's no love for the workarounds. It's just very rarely does CRM implementation really embrace how people work. And very rarely does it embrace the motions that it needs to enable and accelerate. I firmly believe that the only measurement of a CRM is, does it enable you to make better decisions at, at the point of sale up to the executive level? Are you able to generate more sales because you use the CRM, and is generating business easier to do with the CRM? If it doesn't meet those three conditions, then I don't think it's a successful implementation.
I like that you're also kind of approaching it from an angle of trying to keep things simple too. One thing that we'll see often being a Salesforce consulting shop, obviously, is what can, I think, kill that drive to want to do it is not either a lack of understanding of why I need to get certain information into the CRM, either like the game of telephone, people up top, yeah, hey, we need this because it's going to help us refine the ICP or whatever. They don't understand that, so they just see it as noise. Or what also will happen, especially because we work with a lot of tech startups, you'll have a lot of people that come in and out, they create fields along the way that they thought they needed. And then we'll use a tool to kind of pull the adoption of those fields. And it's like more than half or like used 1% of the time. And so in that situation, it's like, well, I don't really blame them either because a lot of this stuff never gets used. They never see in a report. No one follows up on it. And so then I think it starts to like put that mentality out there of like, I don't really need to do a lot of this stuff in here. At the end of the day, like you're saying, I just need to make sure that my job is somewhat tracked so that I can have help, get help from my manager when I need it, and close more deals and get more revenue for the business. I think the balance there, like you're trying to describe, is I like kind of trying to keep it as simple as possible, try to add less, and just really focus on what that end goal is, like you said. How do we just get them to do exactly what their job is?
Yeah, a common misstep that I see, and it's oftentimes the first step to bad adoption and bad use is, I'm the salesperson and my sales manager calls me up and says, how did the sales meeting go? How'd your meeting with, ABC go? And I'm thinking to myself, well, it's in the CRM. I updated the CRM like I'm supposed to update the CRM. Why am I having to recite what happened in the meeting to you as well? Whereas when the manager reaches out and goes, okay, hey, I see XYZ happened in the meeting. What's our plan with this? What's happening with that? It really should put a sales manager into a coaching position and a leadership position, more than I'm trying to log your diary.
Your diary. Okay, so I have an answer for this, but let me get your take on it. What would you say is the difference then between like a manager that is enabling the sales rep versus someone that, like you said in another way, micromanaging them? Like, what's the difference between that line?
So a manager, if I understand the question correctly, a manager that's enabling is increasing the capacity that a salesperson has to sell. They're improving skills. The micromanager is becoming the bottleneck. They're making the decisions. The most common trap that we see sales managers fall into is we call it the super rep syndrome. They become the power closers or they approve everything. That manager should be an accelerator, should provide some authority and capability and translate their experience into actions. But, if a manager is not enabling and accelerating the behaviors that reps need to implement, and the thing that's interesting about when I say the behaviors that reps need to demonstrate is no two reps sell the same way twice, right? You've got to embrace that variance. You have to account for different styles and different approaches. And what a strong CRM does is it creates the standardization at the center of what's going on to enable the flexibility at the point of conversation, at the point of sale, so that things become a very seamless experience. I used to coach college baseball and I worked with hitters. 2 of the 4 years I coached, we were a top 20 offense in the country. And one of the things that I identified as I was coaching baseball was, no two batters swung the bat the same way. Everyone has a different approach, but there is a science to hitting. There's something called the swing path. There are basically 3 points in the swing that you want to have where you want your hands to be and where you want the bat to be and timing to the ball to maximize the probability of hitting the ball firmly. The same, now how you get there is completely independent of each person. As a matter of fact, the reason that there's so much variance in how they swing is everybody making their adjustments to be able to get to those points of the swing from a commonality standpoint. When you build your pipeline, that's your swing path, right? That's the key milestones to sale that say, between point 1 and 2 it's almost of an effect. I don't care how you get there. You just need to get here, right? And it needs to be firmly that you're here from point 2 to 3. That needs, a lot of variance in the path to get there, but we need to get there. And far too often we make it about, and, we make it an accounting exercise or, a series of activity exercises. We don't really sit down and think about what is the path to sale and what are the key elements within those steps to enable us to accomplish that. And so the CRM has no consistency to it, and sales reps get, it becomes that one more thing that they have to do that, it becomes a time suck and doesn't aid them in selling more and more easily.
I like that. That's a really good analogy to use too, because you're definitely right around trying to kind of back off where it doesn't matter, to your point of like using the coaching with batting, right? It's like, here's 3 things I know have to happen or most likely to increase your chances of hitting the ball firmly, like you said. These 3 things. Now, how you get to that point, what you do after that point, I don't necessarily care, right? But these 3 things are really what we want to focus on. So whatever you got to do ahead of time to prepare yourself to get to that point, that's really what we want to focus on, and not getting so much into the day-to-day of, like you probably see a lot of the time when it comes to micromanaging, which is almost trying to make them run it the way that they think instead of getting out of the way. And hey, you hired this person because you felt like they had talent. You felt like they could help your business sell more stuff. So kind of let them do what they do best in their own unique way with their own unique personality to get to this point. And then here in these areas, sure, just like with the batting, here's the 3 areas that maybe we do need to focus on. Maybe a little bit of your tone, exactly what you're saying, how you describe the product. Those are some things that we can help you with. Kind of brings me to my next point, which is like, I've had a couple of these conversations in the past on this podcast, but like around AI, getting some of the context in there. You kind of mentioned one of them, which was like, you see Gong kind of being a leader in something like this, where it gets all of our call transcript. We then put that into something like the CRM. And then having more of an approach where you're trying to look at that ahead of time and then dialing into those 3 points that we're referring to, which is like, hey, listen to the call, this specific area here. Here's, let me tell you how you can tweak this, or what happened, and tell me about this situation right here. Why did we go this route with it? How are you seeing that kind of work and fail? Because I would imagine on the failure side, you're probably also having a lot of people where it's just like, dump all the context in there. And then as the sales manager, like it's just more things that I can pick at and kind of be the helicopter person around you. So I guess where do you see like the line when it comes to using AI to kind of use it in an intentful way versus just more data?
So, is at the end of the day, at least as it is manifesting itself today, especially when we're talking about Gen AI, which is really the application that we're seeing, that's really impacting CRM, is hyper data automation. And one of the things that's really interesting about data in all of its aspects is data is super powerful when it aids in your thinking. When you're using data in a structured way to aid in your thinking, it is powerful. It becomes dangerous when it replaces, right? And so when AI makes low value activities and, I don't have to keep the same notes that I had to keep and keep track and tell you can you repeat yourself? What did you say? So that way I can pay attention to more of the high points of what's going on. I can listen for context and things like that. It's powerful. One of the things that I'm seeing where I think is AI gone awry, you see this on the sales development side where AI has powered emails that are going out, has taken over writing the emails. And the challenge is what you automate becomes invisible. And so what happens is salespeople get disconnected from their message, right? So I send all these emails. Actually, I was on a coaching call. I was listening to a call the other day, and the rep, the rep didn't even remember what it was that led to the conversation. And so the prospect was like, "Hey, I'm sure whatever you said to me resonated, but I have 100 conversations a day. Can you tell me, what is it that we're like, you couldn't have asked for a better question than that, but you get so disconnected." So, what I'm finding is people talk about the challenge of a CRM being, presenting friction. And we talk about friction. I think we do a lot of harm in how we talk about friction because we talk about it as though all friction is bad. And I think there's a lot of friction that's bad. Low value friction is bad. Sludge. I think that's the behavioral economics term for bad friction is sludge. That's bad. But if we think about any value, all value that's created is friction. Everything that matters has friction to it. And so what a good CRM does is it actually slows the rep down in certain places. It forces the rep to think about and pause and say, do I have all of the information? What does this information mean? How does this translate? So, having AI kind of take an unstructured conversation and then structure that data so that the rep can then more easily bring judgment and bring that judgment into the CRM. That's a very powerful way to utilize AI. When AI just updates the properties. Now, again, don't get me wrong. There are certain properties, marketing needs to know this. Okay, marketing needs to know this. And so having that updated automatically, if it's accurate, is great. The rep, that's not important. But when it updates everything, what you end up seeing, and I see this regularly when I coach reps, is they're becoming increasingly passive in sales. And you talk about tech companies. I'm seeing more and more situations where the rep's not really leading the communication. AI is. They're not leading the demo. The sales engineer is. When it comes, and then they're wondering, why are these deals, taking longer from a sales cycle standpoint? Why are they getting to the finish line and not, they don't have the way to get across the finish line? We forgot that fundamental principle that we've got to create value in the sales process, right? That's why we have salespeople. Salespeople are there not just to win the business that we were going to win anyways, but to generate the business and win the business that we wouldn't have won had we.
Yeah, I like that. It kind of almost reminds me too of like old school sailing kind of movies that you watch, like The Boiler Room or Wolf of Wall Street or something like that, where kind of the reverse, right? Where it's like before all this technology and AI and the ease of convenience, you rely on this guy that you hire that potentially is just going to be able to just close anybody. He has all the repertoire and everything that he needs to be able to do to close the deal and get it done. Obviously, there's a whole sales cycle of like, you want to make sure that they find who you are, know who you are and all that stuff before you get on the close. But it kind of felt like when you watch those movies, that's more like what they're highlighting. It's like, this is the sales guy. And to your point, as we've kind of moved the other way with all these awesome tools that come out, they should help to do the job. They should help find things to help enable us and find little things to pick at. It almost seems like in a way, it's shifting a little bit the other way, like you just called out, where it's like, because of all of that, yeah, I guess really as the sales guy, what am I doing? I'm kind of waiting at times just to close the thing up. I'm not really sending out the emails. I'm not really sending out the DMs. That's all kind of automated. I'm not really following up on the notes. The notes kind of got generated and gave me a little bit of a summary of what happened. That's not really maybe what I think happened. That's just what AI kind of told me that happened. So it's kind of switching the other way, which is interesting. I'm sure it's not for every sales rep out there, but it seems like that is as far as what's highlighted.
The power of this is historically sales was the most behaviorally dependent discipline in business. And you can't scale behavior when everybody's and so you relied on, the old school sales room relied on the genius seller to, lift up and the thing is, you don't scale an organization by your top 10% reps. You scale an organization by what your typical rep does. What's the average? How do we skew the average up and to the right? And AI and the tools and systems that we have in place, that's the opportunity that we really have, is to truly impact that middle 50% of the reps to generate greater success, which is what enables us to scale. The challenge is, and we actually call this the prime direct, is when the business process isn't leading it, when the business process isn't driving the technology, and instead you end up having the technology driving the business process. If you don't have a clearly defined process, clearly defined methodology, clearly defined, well-developed scorecard, understanding of the tools that you're using, the playbooks and so forth, if that's not clearly laid out, then the technology finds itself puts itself in the driver's seat. And that's when I think of the Allstate commercials, right? Mayhem follows. And that's what we're seeing, time and time again. And that's where, when we see CRM implementations that languish, what we find is, 95 times out of 100, the CRM's not the problem. It's a gap, a conflict, ambiguity in the underlying business. And it's really a conversation that needs to be had of how do we do this? How do we want to do this? More than how does the CRM need to be configured? Now, once you're clear, and by the way, the fascinating thing is I've come in and, we've been involved in some very complicated CRM implementations. And what I find is more often than not, as you clarify the business process, the complexity of the configuration goes down precipitously.
We see the same. We try to make sure that we have like an architect that has experience with that, like on our side on those calls. And like you're saying, even when sometimes we'll see that the architect will simplify it for them and they're still kind of hung up on having it more complex than it needs to be, right? Because in their head, the business is complex and there's a lot of moving things. And it is helpful to have that other perspective, someone like yourself and your team too, coming in to just be like, okay, so if we boil all this down, basically you just need like these two things, right? Like you need somebody to sell here. And so like a record type, for an example, is always what comes up. You have two people that you sell to essentially, this person, and you need to know this type of information for person A and this type of information for person B, and that's kind of it. But in their head, not looking at it that way, again, like they get caught up in, I feel like, some of those nuances, which leads to this whole everything we just talked about. More fields than you need, more push on things that we don't really need to get filled out in the first place in the CRM. So yeah, that's a good call out too, I feel like.
Yeah, I refer to those as bottom-up implementations as opposed to top-down implementations. And then, the next thing you know, you start solving for 17 hypotheticals. It's like I remember I was dealing with one person, it was a salesperson who said, we need this. I forget the details of it, but I said, when's the last time you had a situation like this? And his response, well, it's been 10 years ago, but it happens. I'm like, I'll tell you what, how about we solve the 10 years ago thing? Like, let's do that later. Let's right now take care of the things that are happening every day.
Yeah, you get a lot of those one-offs that pop up because, yeah, and I think, again, that's like right people, right place type of situation, because sometimes when we're working through what the business does, everything we're trying to figure out, you'll pull in somebody that maybe they were just, hey, this person knows a lot what's going on, but they're just in the day-to-day. So they're just trying to tell you everything that could possibly happen, and you get wrapped up in that. It is important to just make sure that you notate, is this one of the 90% of the times or 10% of the times this stuff happens? If it's 10, like you're saying, we might not necessarily need to include this. One thing I wanted to kind of like end on with one of our questions here. So we talked a lot about good CRM implementations, questions we should ask, how to enable some of the sales managers, what sales reps kind of see as a pushback to not want to use it. Final kind of question to tie it all together, since we talked a lot about like what the problem is. What does a good situation look like if you had your way to set up the CRM for the sales manager to just focus on what they need to focus on and allow the sales reps to sell? Is there an ideal way that you look to try to set that up?
Well, talk about it in the revenue acceleration framework. Actually, the thing that's important, and this is why having clear business process is so important, is understanding where you are in the process is super important. What I'm doing at the end of a sales cycle is very different than what I'm going to be doing at the beginning of a sales cycle. And so what a CRM does, what it enables the rep or the manager to do is to have the conversation with the rep where I don't have to. I mean, if you look at a pipeline review, you end up spending 90% of the time on a pipeline review is going over basic data of what's happening. So you only have 10% to really talk about the strategy or to identify what are the underlying barriers. What a strong CRM that's laid out does is it gives that quick picture so that the manager knows what's going on. And it basically inverts that. It's 10% data gathering and 90% coaching on the opportunity strategy, working forward, what do I have to do? And so sales manager rep conversations become far more action oriented rather than just recap.
Yeah, getting into those one-on-ones where it is just kind of reviewing things that necessarily don't matter, activities or how many times you logged in, or I guess like it can kind of show you or point you in the right direction based on some of those behaviors. But sometimes I see that the actions have been surrounded around those things that aren't going to really do anything one way or the other. Because the same good question, like you could say to somebody that you've already pointed out, is if you have one of your top sales reps that is technically lower on logging level, lower on the adoption, you're not necessarily worried about that person because they're selling for you, right? You only start picking on those people that are kind of at the bottom with those types of activities if that's how they're minded around it. And it's really not what the end result should even be. It should be focused on trying to enable the whole team up, like what you mentioned earlier. I think that's a really good way to wrap it. Before we end this, obviously, you just want to make sure everyone has a chance to go find everything that you would like them to find. So we've mentioned your book. Do you have any specific blogs or social channels that you want to push people to that we can link for you?
Yeah, on LinkedIn, I'm Doug Davidoff on LinkedIn. Check out our website, liftenablement.com. We've got an active blog there. We're publishing regularly there. And go to Amazon and check out the Revenue Acceleration Framework.
Awesome. Okay, we'll make sure we link all those in the description below as well so that they can find it a little bit easier. Appreciate the conversation today, Doug, and looking forward to speaking with you a little bit after this as well.
Same, Jordan. It was a pleasure.